Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Tuesday, August 18th, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. On today's episode, we'll hear highlights of the fascinating conversation held by 5 showrunners on August 14th in West Hollywood as Variety hosted its annual pre-Emmys Showrunners Breakfast. The intimate gathering was packed with writers and producers who were featured on our annual Showrunners Impact list. Plus, we had some name-brand executives, including FX chief John Landgraf and 20th Television topper Carrie Burke. The event also featured the presentation of Variety's Norman Lear Creative Conscience Award to the prolific Ryan Murphy. Murphy spoke from the heart about his friendship with Lear, but before we get to all of that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. Well, this was predictable. Disney and ABC have filed a First Amendment lawsuit against the Federal Communications Commission. That raises the stakes a notch in the extraordinary public battle that Disney has waged with FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, who has been on a campaign to pressure ABC with threats against the broadcast licenses for ABC-owned stations in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and 5 other markets. Much more to come on this. South by Southwest is adding a podcast festival to the lineup for the 2027 event that will unfold March 15th through 21st in Austin, Texas. The podcast gathering makes so much sense given that Austin is a real hub for the audio world. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. And now it's time for conversations with industry leaders about news and trends in show business. Today we'll hear highlights from Variety's invitation-only Showrunners Breakfast. We brought together 5 top Emmy contenders to talk shop, compare notes, commiserate a little bit, but mostly share the joy of being able to produce television at this incredible time for media. The voices you'll hear from are Ashley Nicole Black, writer and executive producer of Apple TV's Shrinking; Debora Cahn, creator, writer, and showrunner of Netflix's The Diplomat; Dan Harmon, executive producer of Adult Swim's Rick and Morty; Jeff Luini, executive producer of FX's Welcome to Wrexham; and Jonathan Tropper, creator, writer, and showrunner of Apple TV's Your Friends and Neighbors. But let's start with some very heartfelt words from Ryan Murphy, who is this year's recipient of the Norman Lear Creative Conscience Award. Murphy was clearly moved to be recognized as an exemplar of Lear's spirit in a room full of his colleagues.
It was around 2004 when I first heard from Norman. My assistant said Norman Lear was on the line, and I thought for sure it was a prank, but I picked up and it actually was Norman. And he was everything I wanted him to be and everything that I needed at that time. And I'm not often tongue-tied, but I was then. And I said, "How are you?" And he said, "Better now that I'm talking to you." And I later found out that it was his line he used on all the girls and boys for decades. And he asked me a lot of questions. I spent like an hour with that man on the phone who was my idol. How did I get the show made? What were the obstacles? What were the joys? And it was a conversation that would continue for the rest of his life. Norman always called me after every success, and more importantly, during times where things weren't going right. I consider myself extremely lucky because I got advice from him, certainly, but I also got to tell him more than once that he was the reason I was in this business. So my Norman origin story is this. My parents would not let me watch All in the Family because I was only 6 or 7 and it was too adult. My father also burnt a book that he found in my room that was called Carrie, so that was kind of the environment at my house. But my parents went out most Saturdays, and so I would be babysat by a dear, nearly blind aunt who was also very bribable, so I never missed an episode of All's Family. And I cut to one night, my father was out of town on a Saturday night, and my mother stayed home, and I begged her to let me watch this forbidden thing, and she finally gave in. And that was the night an episode called Edith's Birthday aired. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It really does stand up. But the episode involved Edith fending off a sexual assault. So I was incredibly young, and halfway through the episode, I remember bursting into tears, and I ran out of the room, and I went to my room, and I was incredibly upset. And my mother walked in and said, I knew it. It was too adult for you. But I got myself together because then, like now, I really wanted to see how it ended. So I calmed down and I said, I'm fine. And I poured her a glass of wine, and that did the trick. And she let me finish the episode holding her hand, which is one of actually my favorite moments of between my mother and me. And by the end of that episode, I realized something that would never really leave my body, and that is television can change hearts and minds, and TV characters really become like friends, which we all know because they're beamed into your house. And if you do it right with heart, you can reach hearts. Anyway, I got to tell Norman that story about the impact it had on me, and how I realized so young that tackling important, if controversial, topics were necessary. And the amazing thing about that, when I told him that, is he burst into tears like nobody had ever said a nice word to him in his life. But that was Norman, who is so both strong and fragile and humble, as many of us, and I think in the room, remember him. Throughout our nearly 2 decades of friendship, one of the things Norman would always say to me, usually at the end of a catch-up, was never give up and never stop. And I'd always say, but you stopped after 7 years. And he would laugh and he would say, yeah, but I'm not you, kid. I believe it was the Dalai Lama and then later Andy Warhol who said a sign of someone who has lasted and had an impact in this world is someone who can be destroyed and then is able to rise from the fire 3 times. And as of this morning, I am on my 6th cycle of this pattern. So thank you to the media, and thank you to all my friends who support me through these patterns of fire and also joy.
And now we turn to the lively panel that was moderated by my great colleague Michael Schneider, Variety's TV editor. Schneider asked the panel what advice they would give to younger showrunners coming up today, given that the nature of television and content creation is changing so much. Their responses start with Dan Harmon, followed by Ashley Nicole Black, and then Harmon again.
When you have conversations with your younger staff writers or folks who one day are going to be running their own shows, what are you talking to them about? What are you thinking? What do you think they're going to face in, say, 10, 15 years in this business?
I try not to hang out with them because that doesn't go well. Power dynamic and all. So I'll sometimes invite them to the smokehouse for a Negroni, but then if they have one, I'll have half of one and I get the hell out of there because I want my dogs to have generational wealth. They say the 8th cancellation takes, and I'm going to assume that's true. But
I've seen all the merch. I think you're doing just fine.
I honestly feel like you would have a better answer because I hear things that horrify me. From younger writers, I hear because Rick and Morty has been very grandfathered in. So if you're going to have job security, we went WGA a couple years ago, and that allowed us to have like a family where it's like, if there was a show where you were going to hang your hat, that would be one. And yet I still hear the kids at that show kind of talking about what they're going to do next so that they don't. And it's because of the industry in general. And my terrifying fear is that, and this is maybe what my shrink would call magical thinking, but you went to shrink camp, I assume, for your show. Doesn't it seem like within a couple of years, writers are going to be paid like substitute teachers and it's always going to be a part-time job? Go take it.
Someone take it.
It kind of is. Like, I work with Neil Goldman, who you've worked with, and we're always like, this is the job he was doing when he was this age, but it doesn't pay like it did when he did. So we're always teasing him about how many sports courts he has at his house and stuff like that. So it does start to feel like work is getting more and more temporary. And a couple years ago, it'd be like, okay, I have to work on 2 or 3 shows a year, but there have to be 2 or 3 shows in order to make that work. So before I did this, I was a teacher. So I often go back and talk to the class of my teacher friends. And they're like, what do I do? Should I be learning AI? Should I be? And I'm like, just be really, really good, because you can't chase what the industry is doing now, because what they're doing now is not even what they were doing 6 months ago. So there's no point in trying to chase what's going to be next. You just have to have a voice that is so unique and so singular and so good that your script rises to the top of an ever-growing pile. But it's hard to know. I mean, when we take shows out now, there's It's like, oh, this place isn't buying comedies, and this place isn't buying comedies, and this place isn't buying comedies. So you're just like, I guess I'll try to get Harrison Ford to be in my comedy, and then maybe someone will want to hear it. It's a weird time to be coming up for
Yeah,
sure.
remember syndication?
No, literally no.
That's why I say, like, ask her.
Literally no.
Because she was born in Max Headroom's wasteland. Like,
the first show that I worked on was like the last show that like got residuals. And so yeah, I didn't live through any of that golden days.
I can barely remember it. I tell people, I'll remember that we did 25 episodes of Community a year, and then I hear myself and I sound like a Vietnam vet. It's crazy.
Now we'll get perspective on the same advice question from Jeff Luini, followed by Jonathan Tropper, and then Debora Cahn.
I have a lot of young people who reach out to me. I'm actually a person who responds to LinkedIn, and I like to talk to people who are coming up. I started at the bottom, and I tell them, make stuff. Like, try and get in whatever you can do to get in and be around the industry. Doesn't matter if you're a PA on an unscripted show, a reality show, or you can get in a room. Everyone wants to get in the room. That's what everyone's reaching out to me about, is writing. Like, I can't help you with that, but go do stuff. You have the ability to take your phone and make something. And it may start out as terrible. The next thing you do will be a little bit better. And make stuff and you will get seen. Someone out there, and as far as AI goes, the next great thing might come from that, because we are so walled off in our community here and so averse to it. And I'm like the next, South Park. Who's making that?
No, in the time that we did this panel, someone just watched 20 episodes of a micro drama. So it is a crazy time. Jonathan and Debora, I'll let you guys finish up. Any words of advice that you give your staffers these days, your younger folks who are just starting out in this business? And it's a very different business than the ones that you guys started out in.
I had just finished, I think, my second year as a writer on a show when someone, and I won't name names, said that peak TV was over. And I was like, fuck that guy. But in The Sopranos had just ended, yes, a lot of great things had just ended. And like, we're still here and we're doing stuff. It's different. And I don't pretend to have any sense of what the structural changes are going to be, but the structural changes in going from 25 episodes a year to we now finished season 4 and we've now done 24 episodes. Like, we've finally, 4 years later, we've done a season of television, but
incredible television.
Thank you.
Big fan.
The basic principles that we practiced in the room when it was West Wing, when it was the comedy that we were talking about, when it was Inside Schwartz, which I was a writer's assistant on, and when it was Grey's Anatomy, whatever it was, the basic process of you come up with a story, the story sucks, it gets destroyed because somebody had low blood sugar, and then you have to come up with another story. Like, that hasn't changed very much at all. And I feel like, given the thing that we had that writers now don't have, like the young people coming up on my show, it's taken them 4 years to see 24 episode arcs and to learn that, like, oh, that disaster that we predicted on 6 was a disaster, but we all seem to have been okay when it was over and like the show didn't die. So that sense of pattern recognition, I think, is harder to develop. And I feel like that's the thing that finally in season 4 of running the show, I'm starting to get. Like, the panic doesn't go away because we're still trying to do something we haven't done. Like, we're still looking to do something slightly different and more. So we're putting ourselves in a situation where we don't know what we're doing. So panic is what it's supposed to feel like. Like, 24 years in the industry, and I finally figured it out that is what it's supposed to feel like. So that, I think it will be harder to generate that kind of intrinsic sense of you don't have to panic when you're panicked. But they're going to have a different kind of career. I don't think it's going to be over because people still like stories a lot, and I think we still do them better than The Thing does, but I don't pretend to be able to predict anything.
But I do love that you made an Inside Schwartz reference. That's pretty remarkable.
I'm here for you, dude.
Jonathan, your final thoughts.
I hesitate to talk about AI too much because depending on which podcast and which documentary I've just watched or listened to, I have very different ideas about how fast it's going to. I just know however fast we think is going to change things, it's going to be faster. And whether it's going to be a helpful tool or a disruptive force or both, I think I cling to the hope that art will still have to be created by the vision of humans. Whether they're using AI to realize that or not is going to become, is going to fracture a lot of things. But I think ultimately, I'd like to believe the vision still has to originate from a human who has a story to tell. I have trouble speaking to young writers only because I didn't work my way up in writers' rooms. I started as a show creator, so I don't have, I missed, and I think I'm the worst for it, I missed the working your way up in writers' rooms. But I talk about when I was a novelist, and when my first books were coming out, the Barnes & Noble and Borders superstores were knocking the independents out of business. And I had always had this dream of like, the independents really supported my first novel, and that's how I made it. And by the time I was going on book tour for my third book, they were gone. And it was just Borders and Barnes & Noble. And then a few years later, Amazon knocked those guys out of business. And then by the time I was doing my later books, the independents were back. Because with those guys gone, there was room for independence again. And I think similar cycles have happened in the movie business and in the TV business. And I think the idea is the economy is going to change and the channels are going to change. But I think there's always going to be entrepreneurial efforts and there's always going to be opportunities depending on what shakes up, how the industry shakes up here. There's going to be an opportunity to start these companies here. So because I'm generally optimistic, but because I like to portray a generally optimistic person, I'd like to believe that however the industry transforms itself, there will still be opportunities for people to create the channels that need artistic input.
And finally, Ashley Nicole Black swoops in to put an exclamation point on the conversation.
I think people will also always want to fantasize about kissing an actor, like a human actor with lips. So I think that will always be our insurance policy.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. Save the date for the International Emmy Awards. The ceremony is set for November 23rd in New York. Gerhard Zeiler, longtime executive of Germany's RTL and more recently Warner Brothers Discovery, will be honored with the group's Emmy Directorate Award. Hard to believe, but the 25-year anniversary of 9/11 is coming up. ABC News is looking back at how America recovered from that trauma with a special set for September 1st, 9/11 United We Stand 25 years later. It will be led by Good Morning America anchor Michael Strahan, and it will put the emphasis on how sports, music, Broadway, comedy, and beloved community helped Americans rediscover joy and heal in the wake of the attacks. Before we go, congrats to Jenny Tartikoff. She's been named Senior Vice President and Head of Communications for the satellite radio and podcast company SiriusXM. Tartikoff is an entertainment veteran who previously worked for Paramount Pictures, Rubenstein Communications, NBC News, and CBS News. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Michael Schneider. Stick, snicks, hick, picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.